at the front of her war council, the weight of her people's hopes resting on her shoulders. He had seen her lead countless times, each moment filled with strength and elegance. But in that moment, something was different. He was no longer just a soldier watching from afar. He was a man, consumed by a love he had no right to feel. The queen's name was Erysia, and she ruled the Korathian Empire with an iron fist. Her people, once scattered across the galaxy, had found unity under her command. Her eyes, dark and piercing, were the only thing that revealed the depth of her struggle. Behind her proud, unyielding exterior, there was a woman, one who had known pain, loss, and sacrifice. And as the human watched her now, he couldn't help but feel that he, too, had become a part of her story. He had first met her years ago when he was assigned to her personal guard. He was just another soldier, another face in the ranks. But from the moment their paths had crossed, something had changed. The way she spoke, the way she carried herself, it all stirred something deep within him. She wasn't like the others. There was a fire in her, a passion that burned brightly, even in the darkest moments. As the days passed, he found himself drawn to her more and more. He would steal glances when he could, trying to keep his feelings hidden. He had no right to be infatuated with the queen. She was a ruler, a symbol of power, while he was just a soldier, a tool meant to do her bidding. But every time their eyes met, a connection was formed. It was fleeting, but it was real. Now, standing in the war room, he could see the weight of the galaxy on her shoulders. The war with the Scarans had been brutal, with no end in sight. The galaxy trembled on the brink of destruction, and Erysia knew she was the only one who could hold it all together. But even the strongest leaders had their breaking points, and he could see that she was nearing hers. The war had been hard on her, harder than anyone could imagine. She had lost countless soldiers, including friends who had once stood beside her. And with each loss, the weight on her heart grew heavier. But she never let it show. She was the queen, and her people needed her to be strong. But the human soldier could see the cracks in her armor. He could see the loneliness in her eyes, the longing for something more than just victory, something more than just duty. The soldier had never expected his feelings to grow this strong. He had never planned on falling in love with the queen. But as the days turned into months, he couldn't ignore what was inside him anymore. He had tried to bury it, to focus on his duty. But every moment spent with her, every glance, every word, only made his feelings grow. And now, standing in the war room, he realized that he couldn't keep it inside any longer. His heart raced as he watched her speak to the council, her voice commanding and unwavering. He knew she was brilliant, a true leader. But he also knew that beneath the surface, there was a woman who had lost so much. And he couldn't help but want to be the one to show her that there was still something worth fighting for, something beyond the war, beyond the politics. The meeting came to an end, and Erysia turned to leave. The soldier's heart skipped a beat as she walked past him, her presence overwhelming. He could feel the tension in the air, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. For a moment he hesitated. Then, without thinking, he stepped forward, catching her attention. "Your Majesty," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. Erysia paused and turned to face him, her eyes locking with his. There was a brief moment of silence before she spoke. "What is it, soldier?" He swallowed, his throat dry. This was it. The moment he had been dreading and longing for. He knew he shouldn't do this. He knew it could destroy everything. But in that moment, he didn't care. All he could think about was her. I want to marry you," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "More than anything." For a brief moment, the world seemed to stop. The words hung in the air, and for a second he thought he might have made a terrible mistake. But then, to his surprise, Erysia smiled. It was a smile filled with complexity, sadness, affection, and something else he couldn't quite place. "You want to marry me?" she asked, her voice gentle yet filled with an emotion he couldn't quite read. He nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. Yes, he whispered. More than anything. Irisia's smile remained, but there was a sadness in her eyes now, a hint of something more. She took a step closer to him, her presence overwhelming as always. And for a moment he thought, she might say something, anything, that would make everything make sense. But instead, she said nothing. She simply looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and understanding. She had no answer for him. Not yet. I will give you my answer, she said softly, when the time is right. And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving the human soldier standing there, his heart aching with a love that he knew might never be returned. Days passed after the Queen's cryptic response, and the soldier couldn't shake the feeling that his confession had changed everything. Irisia's smile lingered in his mind, but the sadness in her eyes haunted him. She had promised him an answer, but as each day passed, it became clear that the answer might never come. He didn't know what it meant, but he could feel the distance growing between them, not just physically, but emotionally too. He couldn't decide whether to hold on to the hope that she would return to him or to accept the silence and move on. War raged on, and the soldier's duties continued without pause. He spent his days training the new recruits, patrolling the corridors of the Queen's ship, and ensuring the safety of the royal family. But his thoughts were never far from her. Even when his comrades talked about the battle ahead, about strategies and alliances, his mind wandered back to Irisia. There was a pain in his chest that he couldn't quite explain, a constant reminder of what he couldn't have. Meanwhile, the Queen seemed more distant than ever. She was still as fierce and commanding as ever, her every decision affecting the fate of entire worlds. But there was a coldness to her that hadn't been there before. She made no attempt to seek him out, no casual conversation when their paths crossed. She acted as though that moment in the war room, that whisper, had never happened. To the others, it appeared that she had returned to her usual self, the powerful ruler who could crush her enemies with a single glance. But the soldier saw through it. He had begun to notice the small things, the way her shoulders sagged when she thought no one was watching, the way her gaze seemed to drift into the distance as if searching for something far beyond the battlefield. Even her voice, once strong and steady, had a faint quiver to it, as though the weight of her role was finally getting to her. The soldier couldn't help but wonder if it had something to do with him, if perhaps the Queen's sadness was a reflection of the same emptiness that plagued him. One evening, as the ship drifted through the vast emptiness of space, the soldier found himself standing outside the Queen's private quarters. He didn't know what had brought him there, only that he couldn't stop thinking about her. He hadn't seen her for days, and something inside him urged him to speak to her again. Maybe he would find out what she had been hiding. Or maybe, just maybe, he would finally get the answer he had been waiting for. He raised his hand to knock on the door, but before his knuckles made contact with the cold metal, the door slid open. Irisia stood before him, her eyes wide with surprise, as though she hadn't expected anyone. For a moment neither of them spoke, the tension between them palpable. The soldier could feel his heart pounding in his chest, the words he had been rehearsing in his mind now forgotten. "Your Majesty," he said finally, his voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside him. I didn't mean to disturb you." Irisia studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then, without a word, she stepped aside, allowing him to enter. He hesitated for a moment, but then crossed the threshold, his heart racing, with both excitement and fear. The room was dimly lit, with soft golden light reflecting off the walls. It was a stark contrast to the cold, sterile corridors of the ship. The Queen's personal quarters were a sanctuary, a place where she could be herself, free from the pressures of her royal duties. Yet even here, in the privacy of her own space, there was a palpable sadness that seemed to hang in the air. Ericia moved to the window, gazing out at the stars. Her back was to him, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. The silence between them stretched on, thick and uncomfortable. The soldier didn't know what to say, but he couldn't just stand there waiting for her to speak first. "I've been thinking about what you said," Ericia said suddenly, her voice soft but firm. "About marrying me." The soldier's heart skipped a beat. This was it. The moment he had been waiting for. He had imagined this moment countless times, but now that it had arrived, he was unsure of how to react. He stepped forward, his eyes searching her face for any sign of what was to come. "I know this is difficult," he began, his voice quiet. "I know it's not easy. But I meant every word. I would give everything just to be with you." She turned to face him then, her expression unreadable. For a long moment she said nothing, simply looking at him as if weighing his words, his sincerity. The soldier could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. It was as if the entire universe had paused, holding its breath, waiting for her to make her decision. "I never asked for this," Ericia said finally, her voice a whisper. "I never asked to feel this way. But there's more at stake than just the two of us. I can't just think about myself, about my own desires." The soldier nodded slowly, understanding the depth of her responsibility. He knew that her people, her entire empire, depended on her strength and leadership, but it didn't change how he felt. It didn't change the truth that burned in his chest. "I understand," he said quietly. "But I can't stop loving you no matter what. I don't want to lose you." She looked at him then, her eyes soft but filled with something he couldn't name. She took a step closer, her gaze never leaving his. For a brief moment, it felt as if the universe had collapsed into just the two of them, as though nothing else mattered. "I don't want to lose you either," she whispered. "But I can't promise you anything. Not yet." And with that, she turned away, leaving the soldier standing there, his heart aching with both hope and despair. It was as if they were standing on the edge of a precipice, and neither of them knew what the future would bring. The days after their conversation passed in a blur. The soldier spent his time locked in his duties, his thoughts often drifting back to the queen. Ericia's words had left an impression on him, but they also left him with more questions than answers. She hadn't said yes, but she hadn't said no either. That small sliver of hope kept him going, even as the war raged on around them. The soldier's feelings for the queen had grown more intense with each passing day, but he had learned to keep them in check. He knew the odds of her choosing him were slim. She was the ruler of an empire, a woman of power and duty, while he was just a soldier, one among thousands. But something in the way she looked at him, the quiet moments they shared, told him that maybe, just maybe, there was something more to their connection. Still, the soldier couldn't stop the doubts from creeping in. He had seen the queen, seen the burden she carried on her shoulders. She was a leader, a symbol of hope for her people, and the weight of that responsibility was heavier than anything he could ever understand. She had no room for personal desires, no space for love, not while the fate of her people rested in her hands. It was late one evening when the soldier found himself standing in the corridor outside the queen's chambers again. He had been summoned to meet her, but this time there was no certainty in his heart. His emotions were a mix of longing and uncertainty. He didn't know what to expect, didn't know if he could bear another conversation where she held him, at arm's length. When the door opened, Ericia stood there, her figure illuminated by the soft glow of the lights behind her. She was dressed in the same regal attire, her cloak flowing behind her as if she were born to rule the stars. But there was something different about her today, something in the way she held herself, the way her eyes met his. "Come in," she said quietly, her voice soft but steady. The soldier stepped inside, his heart pounding in his chest. There was an air of tension between them, but it wasn't the same as before. This time there was something new, something heavier in the air. Erysia seemed different, more fragile than the powerful queen he had known. He couldn't put his finger on it, but he could see it in the way she moved, in the way she avoided his gaze. They stood in silence for a moment, the soldier unsure of how to begin. He wanted to say so many things, to ask her why she had brought him here. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, he simply waited for her to speak first. "I've thought about what you said," she began, her voice low. "About marriage. About us." The soldier's heart skipped a beat. His breath caught in his throat, and for a moment he thought he might have imagined the words. But when he looked into her eyes, he saw the truth in them. She had thought about it. That small, fragile hope began to grow again, flickering in his chest. "I'm not sure what you want from me," she continued, her gaze drifting to the floor. "I've never allowed myself to think about such things. My life, my duty. It's always been about my people, about my empire. But now, I can't ignore it any longer." The soldier stepped closer, his heart filled with emotion. "You don't have to choose between your people and me," he said, his voice gentle but filled with conviction. "I understand what you're facing. I've seen the sacrifices you've made. But I don't want to be just another duty, another obligation. I want to be someone you can rely on, someone who is there for you no matter what." Erysia looked up at him then, her eyes locking with his. There was a vulnerability in her gaze that he hadn't seen before. She was struggling with something, torn between the life she had built for herself and the emotions that she was afraid to acknowledge. "I can't promise you anything," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not yet. I don't know if I can ever be the person you want me to be. I have too much responsibility, too much on my shoulders." The soldier reached out, his hand trembling as he touched her arm. It wasn't the touch of a soldier to his queen, but the touch of a man to the woman he loved. It was a moment of softness, a moment where the weight of the galaxy seemed to fade, if only for a brief second. "I don't need you to promise me anything," he said, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I just need you to know that I'm here for you. I'll be here, whether you're a queen or a woman, no matter what you decide." Erysia's eyes flickered with something that might have been hope, or maybe it was doubt. She didn't say anything, but the way she looked at him made the soldier feel as if she had heard him. She understood what he was offering, even if she couldn't accept it yet. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was heavy, filled with the weight of their unspoken feelings. Erysia seemed lost in thought, her mind torn between her duty to her people and the possibility of a life she had never allowed herself to imagine. The soldier, on the other hand, stood there, his heart laid bare, unsure of what the future would bring, but willing to face it no matter what. Finally, Erysia spoke again, her voice barely audible. "I don't know what the future holds, but I don't want to lose you. Not like this." The soldier's heart soared at her words. It wasn't a promise, but it was something. It was a crack in the wall she had built around herself, a crack that he could feel even if it was small. He reached out to her, his hand finding hers, and for a moment the galaxy didn't seem so cold and distant. "I'll wait for you," he whispered, his voice filled with both hope and uncertainty. "I'll wait as long as it takes." And in that moment, both of them knew that their journey was far from over. The path ahead would be long, filled with challenges and obstacles, but they would face it together, one step at a time. The days that followed felt like a slow march. The soldier did his best to keep his emotions in check, but he could feel the weight of Erysia's words lingering in his heart. She hadn't promised him anything, but her admission that she didn't want to lose him gave him hope. It was a small step, but it was a step forward, and that was enough for him. Despite the growing tension in his chest, he tried to focus on his duties. The war wasn't over yet, and there were still countless battles ahead. The galaxy had become a place of constant conflict, and Arisia's empire was at the heart of it. As much as the soldier longed to be by her side, he knew he had to do his part. He couldn't afford to let his feelings distract him from the fight. But the war, like everything else, had a way of creeping into every moment. It was always there, lurking in the background. The constant threat of attack, the pressure to make the right decisions, the knowledge that lives were lost with every passing day. It was a burden that Arisia carried alone, or so it seemed. The soldier couldn't help but notice how much more withdrawn the queen had become in the past few weeks. Her usual fiery resolve had softened into something almost fragile. She no longer held the council meetings with the same intensity. Her eyes often seemed distant, as if she were somewhere else entirely. She still commanded the respect of her people, but the soldier could see the toll the war was taking on her. One evening, as the ship floated silently through the cold expanse of space, the soldier found himself once again standing outside her chambers. This time, though, he didn't hesitate. He had to speak with her. The unspoken tension between them had grown unbearable, and he couldn't stand the silence any longer. He needed to know what she was thinking, what she wanted. When the door slid open, Arisia was standing there, her posture stiff, as if she were ready to face whatever came next. But there was something in her eyes that made the soldier pause. She looked tired in a way he hadn't seen before. The kind of tiredness that wasn't just physical, but emotional. "You came," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. "I wasn't sure if you would." The soldier stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "I've been waiting for you to tell me what's going on," he said quietly. "You've been distant. I know something's wrong. You don't have to hide it from me." Arisia's gaze dropped to the floor, and for a moment, the soldier thought she wouldn't answer. But then she spoke, her voice tinged with regret. "I don't know how to do this," she said, her words laced with a sorrow that made the soldier's heart ache. "I've spent my whole life making decisions for my people. Every choice I make has consequences, and I can't afford to make mistakes. But with you—" She paused, her breath catching in her throat. "With you, it feels different. It feels like I'm betraying everything I've worked for." The soldier's heart tightened as he listened to her words. He had always known that her responsibility to her empire would come before everything else, but hearing it from her lips made the reality of it all feel even more painful. She was torn, caught between her duty and the feelings she had for him. And as much as he wanted to offer her comfort, he couldn't force her to make a decision. "You're not betraying anything," he said gently. "You're only human. You deserve to have a life outside of the war, outside of the empire. I don't expect you to choose between me and your people. I just want you to know that I'm here for you, no matter what." Arisia met his gaze, and for the first time in what felt like ages, she allowed herself to show something other than the queen's armor. There was vulnerability in her eyes, a crack in the facade that she had worked so hard to maintain. She looked at him, not as a ruler, but as a woman who was, for the first time, considering something other than duty. "I don't know if I can have both," she whispered. "I don't know if I can have you and still lead my people the way they need me to." The soldier took a step closer, closing the distance between them. He reached out and gently cupped her face in his hands, his thumb brushing against her cheek. She flinched at first, as if not used to such tenderness, but she didn't pull away. She simply closed her eyes, letting the warmth of his touch wash over her. "You don't have to decide right now," he said softly. "I'm not asking you to choose. I'm asking you to let me be a part of your life, even if it's just for a little while. We'll figure it out together, one step at a time." For a long moment, Erysia didn't say anything. She simply stood there, allowing the soldier's words to settle in her mind. And then, slowly, she nodded. It wasn't a promise, but it was something. It was a sign that she was willing to consider a future that didn't just revolve around her responsibilities, a future where she could be something more than a queen. "I don't know if I can let go of everything," she said quietly. "But maybe, for the first time, I want to try." The soldier smiled, the weight in his chest lightening just a little. He knew that their journey wasn't over, that the road ahead would still be filled with challenges. But for the first time, in a long while, he felt a sense of hope. They weren't there yet, but they were on the same path, and that was enough. As the soldier stood there, holding Erysia's gaze, he knew that whatever the future held, he would face it with her by his side. Together, they could navigate the complexities of their worlds. Together, they could find a way to balance love with duty. It wouldn't be easy, but he was willing to fight for it, just as he had fought for everything else. The days after their conversation felt like a delicate balance, a quiet understanding that hovered between them, never quite settled but always present. The soldier found himself watching Erysia closely, noticing the small changes in her. She seemed more open, less guarded, but the weight of her responsibilities still pressed down on her, as heavy as ever. She was a queen, and that title was not something she could easily set aside. Still, he saw the way her gaze lingered on him when they were in the same room, the small, fleeting moments of connection that told him she wasn't as distant as she had been before. But there was still a wall between them, a barrier built from years of duty, of leadership, and the unspoken fear that love might bring them both more pain than joy. The soldier couldn't stop thinking about what she had said. "I don't know if I can have both." He knew she was right. Love, in their situation, was complicated. It was dangerous. For both of them. Yet every time he saw her, his heart ached with the same longing. It was a feeling he couldn't ignore, one that had grown stronger with each passing day. He didn't want to pressure her. He knew that, given her position, she had enough to deal with. But he couldn't stop hoping that one day she might choose him over everything else. The idea of spending his life without her seemed impossible, yet he couldn't force her to make a decision she wasn't ready for. One evening, after a particularly grueling battle with the Scarans, the queen appeared in the command center, her face drawn and tired. She was still as regal as ever, standing tall despite the exhaustion that clung to her. The soldier watched her for a moment, his heart heavy with the knowledge of what she had sacrificed. Erysia turned to him, her eyes locking with his, and for the first time in days, the soldier saw something familiar in her gaze, something soft, something real. She didn't speak right away, but he could see the struggle in her expression. "I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this," she said, her voice quiet, almost as if she were speaking to herself. "The war, the decisions, it's too much. I feel like I'm losing everything, and the harder I try to hold on, the more I lose." The soldier stepped forward, his presence a quiet comfort. He wanted to reach out to her, to tell her that she didn't have to carry it all alone, but he also knew that she was a queen. She wasn't used to showing weakness, and he couldn't push her when she wasn't ready. But he couldn't stand to see her like this. "You don't have to carry it all alone," he said softly, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "You have me, Erysia. You always have. I'm here for you, not just as a soldier, but as someone who cares about you. You don't have to be the queen all the time." She looked at him, her eyes filled with a mix of sadness and something else, something that made his heart race. For a moment, he thought she might say something, that she might finally open up, but instead she turned away, her eyes focused on the map projected in front of them. "I can't let go of this," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "If I do, everything will fall apart. My people, they need me. I can't just abandon them." The soldier's heart clenched as he watched her. He knew the burden she carried was not just physical, it was emotional too. Her entire life had been devoted to her people, to their survival. But what about her? What about her heart? "You don't have to abandon them," he said gently. "You don't have to choose between them and your own happiness. I'll be here. No matter what you decide, you don't have to do this alone." Aricia's shoulders tensed, and for a brief moment he thought she might pull away. But instead, she stood still, her back to him, and he could feel the conflict within her. She was torn between the life she had built and the possibility of something more. A life with him. A life where she could be more than just a queen. Finally, she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "I wish I could believe that. I wish I could just let go, but I don't know how. I don't know how to make room for you in my life without losing everything I've fought for." The soldier took a step closer, his heart aching with the desire to make her understand. "You won't lose everything. You'll still be the queen. You'll still have your people. But you can have something for yourself too. Something real. Something that's just for you." For a long time, Aricia was silent, her gaze fixed on the map in front of her, her mind seemingly far away. The soldier waited, giving her the space she needed to process everything. He knew he couldn't make the decision for her. This was something she had to figure out on her own. But finally, she turned to him, her eyes soft and filled with an emotion he couldn't name. She took a deep breath, as if preparing herself for something difficult. And then she spoke, her voice quiet but steady. "I don't know what the future holds," she said, "but I can't keep pushing you away. Not anymore. I can't keep pretending that I don't feel the same way you do. I just don't know how to make it work. But I'm willing to try. I'm willing to see where this could go." The soldier's heart swelled with a mixture of relief and hope. It wasn't a promise, but it was the first step toward something real. Something that could finally break through the walls between them. "I'll wait," he said, his voice full of certainty. "I'll wait as long as it takes." And for the first time in what felt like forever, Aricia smiled. It wasn't the smile of a queen, but of a woman who had finally allowed herself to dream of a different future. A future where she could be more than just a leader. A future where love, however uncertain, could find its place. The days following their conversation felt like a turning point. For the first time in a long while, the soldier felt a glimmer of hope that the future might not be as uncertain as it had seemed. Aricia had said she was willing to try, to let go of the barriers she had built around herself. It wasn't a promise, but it was enough to make his heart leap. The war was still raging on, and the pressure of leadership weighed heavily on Aricia. She threw herself into her duties, managing the empire's defenses and overseeing military strategy. But the soldier couldn't help but notice the subtle changes. She wasn't as distant as she had been. There were moments, brief but significant, when she looked at him with something more than the cold, regal composure that had once defined her. The soldier continued his duties, but now there was an underlying sense of something more. Something that stretched beyond their roles in the war. It wasn't easy, especially when the tension of the conflict was always hanging in the air. But when their paths crossed, there was an unspoken understanding between them, a quiet connection that spoke volumes without words. One afternoon, after a particularly exhausting strategy meeting, Aricia found herself standing alone in the war room. The soldier had finished his assigned tasks and was about to leave when he noticed her back to him as she studied the holographic map of the galaxy. There was something in the way she stood, the slight slump of her shoulders, that made him pause. He stepped forward, quietly crossing the room to stand beside her. She didn't turn to look at him, but she didn't have to. He knew she was aware of his presence. "You've been at this for hours," he said softly, his voice gentle but filled with concern. Maybe you need a break." Erysia didn't respond immediately. She just kept her eyes on the map, her fingers lightly tracing the outline of the star systems. The soldier could see the tension in her posture, the way her fingers tightened as if she were holding on to something more than just the map. "I can't stop," she said after a long pause. "The war isn't over, and I have to make sure we're ready for whatever comes next." The soldier nodded, understanding her commitment. But he also knew the toll it was taking on her. She had already sacrificed so much. It wasn't just her empire that relied on her. It was her heart, too. He could see it in the way she looked at him, the way her gaze softened when they spoke. It was clear that she was fighting her own battle, one that had nothing to do with the war around them. "You can't do everything alone," he said, his voice quieter now. "I'm here for you. You don't have to carry this burden on your own." She turned to face him, and for the first time in days, she allowed herself to show something beyond the queen's mask. There was a weariness in her eyes, a vulnerability that she hadn't let anyone see before. It was as if she had been holding her breath for too long, afraid to let go, afraid of what might happen if she did. "I know," she said softly, "but I can't let go. Not yet." The soldier's heart tightened at her words. He had known that this would be hard, but hearing it from her, seeing the struggle in her eyes, made the weight of it all feel even heavier. She wanted to let go, to surrender to the feelings they both shared, but the weight of her responsibilities was too much to ignore. She couldn't escape her duty, no matter how much she wanted to. "You don't have to let go completely," he said, his voice steady, but filled with emotion. "I'm not asking you to give up everything. I'm asking you to share it with me. Let me help you, in whatever way I can." Erysia's gaze softened, and for a moment it seemed like she might say something that would change everything. But instead, she simply shook her head, as if resigning herself to the inevitable. "I don't know if I can," she whispered. "I've been alone for so long, holding this empire together, keeping everything in balance. I don't know how to be anything else, how to be with you." The soldier stepped closer, his hand gently brushing against hers. The touch was light, a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. It was an offer, an invitation to let go of the loneliness that had haunted her for so long. "You don't have to be alone anymore," he said, his voice low. "You don't have to do this on your own. I'm here, always." For a long moment, Erysia didn't speak. She didn't pull away either. The soldier could feel the weight of her indecision, the fear that held her back. It was as if she were afraid to take that final step, afraid that the consequences of letting go would be too great. Finally, she sighed, a sound of resignation and acceptance. She met his gaze, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and something else. Something softer, more hopeful. "Maybe," she said quietly, "maybe we can try. Just try. I'm not promising anything, but I'm willing to see where this goes. If you're willing to wait for me." The soldier's heart soared. It wasn't the answer he had hoped for, but it was something. It was a chance. And that was all he needed. "I'll wait for as long as it takes," he said, his voice filled with determination. "I'm not going anywhere." Erysia didn't smile, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, a glimmer of hope that she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. For the first time, the soldier felt like there was a future for them, a future where they could find a balance between their love and their duties, a future where they didn't have to choose between the two. And for that moment, in the quiet of the war room, everything felt possible. The days turned into weeks, and the soldier could feel the change between him and Erysia, though it was slow, like the thawing of ice on a frozen river. They had both agreed to try, to find a way to balance their love with their responsibilities. It wasn't easy. The war continued to rage, and Erysia's duties were never ending. But there were moments, small ones, when they could steal time for each other. moments when their connection felt stronger than the weight of the galaxy pressing down on them. The soldier found that even in the most difficult times, when the battle seemed endless and the enemy seemed unstoppable, Erisia's presence was a comfort. She had changed in subtle ways. The hardness in her eyes had softened just a little, and there was a vulnerability in her voice when they spoke, as though she had begun to trust him with parts of herself she had once kept hidden. Erisia had not made a decision about their future yet, and the soldier knew that. She was still the queen, still carrying the immense weight of the empire on her shoulders. But he could see that, beneath her duty, there was a woman who longed for something more, something that didn't involve war councils and battle strategies. There was a glimmer of hope in her eyes when she looked at him, a hint of something beyond duty and responsibility. One evening, after yet another successful battle, Erisia sought him out. She found him in the quiet of the ship's observation deck, looking out at the stars. The galaxy stretched before them, a vast sea of stars and empty space, but in that moment, it felt like the whole universe was shrinking down to the two of them. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. The soldier turned, his heart beating faster at the sight of her. He nodded, gesturing for her to sit beside him. Of course. They sat together in silence for a moment, looking out at the stars. It wasn't the first time they had shared this quiet space, but tonight felt different. There was something heavy in the air, a sense of anticipation that neither of them could ignore. Finally, Erisia spoke, her voice filled with both uncertainty and determination. "I've been thinking a lot about everything. The war, the empire, us. I've spent so much of my life focused on what I had to do for my people, what I had to do as their queen. I've forgotten what it feels like to want something for myself, to dream of something more." The soldier's heart ached as he listened to her. He could see the weight of her words, the burden of responsibility that had shaped every part of her life. But he also saw something else, the desire for freedom, for love, for a future beyond the war. "I never wanted to pull you into this world," Erisia continued, "but I can't deny how I feel about you. I can't keep pretending that this, isn't real. I've been afraid of what it might cost me, of what it might cost you. But the truth is, I don't want to keep living like this. I don't want to keep pushing you away." The soldier reached for her hand, his touch gentle and reassuring. He had never wanted anything more than to hear her say those words, but he knew that this was not a simple decision for her. It never had been. "I'm not asking you to choose between me and your empire," he said softly, his thumb brushing over her hand. "I'm asking you to let me be a part of your life. You don't have to carry everything on your own. You never have to face this alone." Erisia looked at him, her eyes searching his face, as if looking for something, some confirmation that he understood the gravity of what she was saying. Slowly she nodded. "I've spent my whole life thinking that being the queen meant being alone," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But maybe I was wrong. Maybe I can have both. Maybe I can have you and still be the queen my people need me to be." The soldier felt his chest tighten as he realized what she was saying. She wasn't promising him everything, but she was opening her heart, willing to take a step into a future where they could be together. It wasn't a fairy tale, but it was real, and that was all he had ever wanted. "I'll wait for you," he said, his voice filled with certainty. "I'll be here. We'll figure this out one step at a time." Erisia smiled, a small but genuine smile, and in that moment, the soldier knew that everything they had been through, the pain, the uncertainty, the distance, had been worth it. They were no longer just a soldier and a queen, two people caught in the web of war. They were two people who had found something real in the middle of chaos, something that would help them survive the battles ahead. "I don't know what the future holds," Erisia said softly, "but I want you to be part of it. I want to try. For once, I want to live for something other than the war." The soldier felt a surge of warmth in his chest, and he squeezed her hand gently. "Then we'll take it one day at a time, and we'll face whatever comes together." Erysia nodded, her gaze soft and filled with something the soldier had never seen before. A quiet peace, a moment of hope that had been absent for so long. For the first time, the weight of her responsibilities didn't seem as heavy. The future was still uncertain, but it was a future they could face side by side, and for the soldier, that was enough. As they sat together, watching the stars in silence, the galaxy outside seemed less vast, less intimidating. It was still a world at war, a universe on the brink of chaos. But in that moment, there was peace, the promise of something more than just survival, a promise of love.